All right. So I got a couple different examples here that I want to get into in terms of how the US and international media has been covering the ongoing situation between Israel and Palestine right now. So I got two different clips here that I think are great examples of how atrocious the coverage can be at times. And then I got a surprisingly great interview that was done over on CNN. And so we're just going to watch through and I'll break these down as we go. So first off here, we have on MSNBC the head of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, who is basically accusing MSNBC of having their scripts written by Hamas, okay, with some of the previous coverage that they have had during this. Now, it depends on which anchor you're talking about in terms of how good their coverage is going to be or how balanced it's going to be in a genuine way, right? Not like a normal, false equivalency media balance type of thing, but actually telling the truth about what led up to the Hamas attacks and the ongoing Israeli apartheid and ethnic cleansing. And there have been a few standout anchors that I think have done a decent job, guys like Ali Velshi or guys like Mehdi Hassan, and basically all they've done is again call out the reality of Israeli occupation and apartheid and ethnic cleansing and the ongoing illegal expansions of settlements into the West Bank, the incredible amounts of IDF backed Israeli settler violence that Palestinians have been subjected to, especially recently under the Benjamin Netanyahu coalition. And so basically just for laying out that objective reality, they are now being accused of, I guess, working for Hamas. So let's go ahead and hear what Jonathan had to say here.
Tell us, if you will, just what these last few days have been like for you and why it's so important you are appearing here today with the Reverend Jonathan.
Well, so I will be honest and maybe a little more vulnerable than I normally would be. These have been some of the hardest days of my adult life. I don't ever remember a moment like this. I have family in Israel right now under siege and being deployed to the front lines. I have staff who can't locate their family. I have friends who are gone. And I think Ambassador Danon put it well in a context that Americans can understand 9/11, the evil that was perpetrated here. But the scale, Jonathan, the right comparison is Nagasaki. This was like an atomic bomb. And as 40,000 people were killed in Japan when they dropped that bomb in Nagasaki, so too were the hundreds upon hundreds of people who were killed in Israel. And
okay. So just pausing on that real quick. So now we're not just comparing the Hamas attack into Israel, which absolutely was horrific. A bunch of civilians got captured or killed. All of that aspect of it is true. But now we're not only comparing it to 9/11, but we're comparing it to Nagasaki. We're comparing it to the only example throughout human history of a country, in this case the United States of America, dropping a nuclear bomb on a civilian population. Okay, I don't need to tell you guys about how horrific that situation was. If you have the stomach for it, maybe go and look at some of the videos and pictures of the aftermath of what that looked like. Just unimaginably destructive. Okay, so honestly, again, it's one thing to say that the attacks against the Israeli civilians was horrible, horrendous, horrific. All of that is perfectly legitimate and fine, but now we're comparing it to a nuclear bomb being dropped on Japanese civilians during World War II, and then also mentioning 9/11 as a comparison point. And he's not the only person who's made that 9/11 comparison point. And honestly, I kind of agree with it in the sense that from what I'm seeing from a lot of US politicians, Israeli politicians, just the broader conversation that I'm seeing happening online right now, it is a very similar vibe to post 9/11 America, where basically everybody was looking for vengeance and blood of who we perceive to be our enemies in this situation. And it seems like, based on what we've seen, the images and videos coming out of Gaza right now, as Israel's conducting this bombing campaign as well as gearing up for a ground invasion, it's like people have completely lost their minds, and now, after seeing these horrific attacks against Israeli civilians, are wanting to justify conducting significantly greater horrific attacks against innocent Palestinian men, women, and children within inside Gaza. And they're using this attack against Israelis as a justification for that. I mean, I literally saw on Twitter, there's this guy like Joe Walsh is one example of it, but tons of other conservatives as well, who are literally making the post 9/11 argument and saying, well, nobody told the United States to de-escalate after 9/11. Nobody told the United States not to do what we did after 9/11. Everybody was totally fine with us going out and launching the wars we did and attacking the people that we did. But it's like, can you just pause for a second? Maybe we look at the war on terror and realize that that was an absolute fucking disaster, that hundreds of thousands of people were killed as a result of that, if not millions of people in Afghanistan and Iraq. We completely destabilized the region. I mean, imagine looking at the post 9/11 war on terror and being like, yeah, that's a thing that we should emulate. That's a thing that we should, try to do again on a smaller scale in this situation. I mean, just completely fucking ridiculous. And then on top of that, okay, listen, I mean, again, this concept of blowback seems to have been completely erased from everybody's minds. In the same way that 9/11 was blowback for the United States foreign policy of, for example, backing the Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan as a cudgel, as a wedge against the Soviet-backed Afghan government at the time, we went in, we backed the Mujahideen fighters, this radical, Islamic sect, in order to push back against communism at the time, right? So we funded them, and then later, what do you know, those groups, those elements that we funded and trained and armed and equipped later turn into, groups like the Taliban, groups like Al-Qaeda, and other elements that then turn around and come back to bite us in the ass. I mean, you could objectively say that 9/11 was a direct result of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East previous to 9/11, and then in the same way, you could make a similar analysis to the Hamas attack against Israel. This was blowback. This was inevitable. That's not condoning the killing of civilians by Hamas in any way, shape, or form, but it's understanding that that kind of thing is inevitable when you put people in the world's largest open-air prison in completely horrific conditions where they have absolutely nowhere to turn. They have no recognition from the international community, especially not the United States that backs and defends Israel. They have no ability to improve their material conditions. Of course, you're going to have some group of people who lash out and engage in acts of violence when they're put into that situation. You cannot simply back people into a corner for, infinity into the future and expect that that's not going to produce drastic results. It's not going to produce an unending cycle of violence. So it's just completely ridiculous that this has just been removed from people's brains. But he continues here.
So while I am sad and trying to cope, I'll be honest, I am angry. I am angry with the world that allowed the dehumanization of Israelis and sanitized the terrorism of Hamas. I must say, I love this show and I love this network. But I've got to ask, who is writing the scripts? Hamas? The people who did this, they are not fighters, Jonathan. They are not militants. And I'm looking right at the camera. They are terrorists.
Okay, again, I mean, he talks about the dehumanization of Israelis. First of all, I haven't seen that from any of the U.S. media, okay? Again, the Ali Velshis of the world, the Mehdi Hassans of the world, they're not dehumanizing Israelis. They went out of their way to say, yes, this attack by Hamas was absolutely horrible. They killed innocent civilians in many instances, right? Absolute disaster. They went out of their way to talk about that. Nobody, especially not on MSNBC, is dehumanizing the Israelis, right? And sanitizing Hamas or sanitizing, that situation either. But think about this from his perspective. Think about this from the perspective of the Israeli government. I just covered yesterday in my video some Israeli top officials literally calling Palestinians animals, saying that they are barbarians, that they don't deserve to be recognized as real human beings. I mean, you have guys in the Israeli government like Itamar Ben-Gvir who want to genocide the Palestinian people. I mean, this is one of the most far-right governments in Israel's history, okay? So the idea that, like, people are, if anybody's being dehumanized in this situation disproportionately, it would be the fucking Palestinians, right? But he turns this on its head, and it's like you can't even have a marginal room to recognize the plight of the Palestinian people without guys like this or organizations like the ADL turning around and saying that Hamas is writing the scripts for MSNBC. I mean, it's just completely absurd at its face value, okay? So I'm going to leave it there, and I'll link this down below if you want to go watch the rest of that interview. He goes on later in it to basically downplay the ongoing bombing campaign in Gaza and literally saying, like, you guys on MSNBC are putting up all of these images of the rubble in Gaza, and you shouldn't be saying that this is unacceptable to go and bomb civilian infrastructure and shit like that. And it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing because, again, the same justification that is now being used, okay, to say that it's okay to go in and to flatten civilian infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, to kill innocent men, women, and children. We already have 140 children that have been killed as a part of these Israeli bombing campaigns into Gaza, and that's before the ground invasion has taken place, okay? 140 children, and the same justification that's being used for that action by the Israeli government could be used if you turn it on its head to say, okay, well then Hamas was justified in going in and killing innocent Israelis because of previous Israeli bombing campaigns into Gaza. This mindset makes no logical sense. It is only going to continue an endless cycle of violence because they are not willing to do an honest analysis of what is at the root cause of that, and that is the the ongoing Israeli apartheid, the ongoing slow-rolling ethnic cleansing, okay, the blockade of the Gaza Strip, the expansions of illegal settlements into the West Bank, the settler terrorism in the West Bank, okay, and the police state and the surveillance apparatus of the Israeli government. These are the things that are at the core of how we ended up with this cycle of violence right now. But he's not willing to engage in that kind of a conversation. He wants this to be a rosy, black and white picture where you have the evil baddies on the Palestinian side. They deserve to be collectively punished for the actions of Hamas. And then you have the perfect Israelis on this side who have never done anything wrong, and certainly none of their own policies could have possibly led up to this. And just as a reminder, in terms of the origins of Hamas, okay, you can go back to the 70s, the 80s, when the Israeli government was explicitly trying to, similar to how we did with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, trying to bolster Hamas, okay, in order to be a cudgel against the more secularist and left-wing factions within Palestine, within the Gaza Strip. Why did they want to do that? Because they don't want there to ever be the possibility of the establishment of some sort of a two-state solution or a Palestinian state. And so they encourage the, bolstering of more radical groups like Hamas explicitly for that purpose, to have a justification against that. There were statements that I showed yesterday in my video from Benjamin Netanyahu just from 2019, where he was telling fellow members of the Israeli Knesset, if you want there to never be a Palestinian state, we have to support Hamas financially and otherwise. We have to bolster Hamas because that's the way we can prevent a Palestinian state from ever being formed. And then they turn around and act like Hamas came out of nowhere. It's like, no, again, this is blowback. Again, that's not justifying killing civilians. Killing civilians is wrong. And if you actually believe that, you should be probably criticizing the government of Israel right now as fervently as you were criticizing Hamas for them killing civilians, because Israel is flattening the fucking Gaza Strip right now. But I mean, again, it's just there's no conversation about this concept of blowback or any internal analysis about the previous actions of the government of Israel, the continuing actions of the government of Israel and the United States. They just don't want to have that conversation. And so with that being said, I want to move on to this second clip here from the BBC, which really just blew my mind. I mean, it was honestly just very depressing. This is a guy, Hussam Zamlat, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name, but he's the head of the Palestinian mission to the UK, and he just lost 6 of his family members amongst the almost 700 killed in Israeli strikes into Gaza so far. Again, those numbers are going to continue skyrocketing over the next couple of days, but just watch how this journalist handles this interview, okay? This guy just had family members who were killed by the Israeli airstrikes, and this is how she decides to conduct herself.
800 dead in Gaza, including members of your own extended family. What do you know what happened to them?
They were just sitting at their home, and they were simply bombarded. Their entire building was brought down. My cousin, Aya, her 2 children, her husband, her mother-in-law, and 2 other relatives died immediately, were killed instantly, and 2 of her youngest children, a twin, 2 years old, are now in intensive care. This is truly heartbreaking, and the issue here, Kirsty, is that they have no bunkers, they have no Iron Dome, they have nowhere to go. They are simply sitting ducks for the Israeli war machine.
I'm sorry for your own personal loss. I mean, can I just be clear, though? You cannot condone the killing of civilians in Israel, can you, nor the kidnapped families?
No, we don't condone, and we are very clear.
I mean, it's almost literally like this guy was just describing to her how 6 members of his extended family were just brutally killed in an Israeli airstrike, and all she heard translated on her end is, this guy is a Palestinian, therefore he must support Hamas killing civilians, therefore I have to ask a question if he condones Hamas killing civilians. I mean, what the fuck kind of a follow-up question is that? Just insanity.
Kirsty, we reject any targeting or harming of civilians from all sides. And you are talking to a Palestinian representative, official, the ambassador that I represent my government, the PLO, the national movement of Palestine, and we have been committed to this for 30 years, not just today or yesterday, for 30 years, since the signing of the Oslo Accords. We have committed to non-violence. We have committed to negotiations, as you know.
Yes, and
so this is nothing new. That's why this question, we have done everything in our power to find a different path.
But we have a situation now, as you heard there from Mark, that Hamas may be an empty threat, threatening to kill hostages. Do you condemn that kind of action?
Listen, hostages must be protected and must be made safe and kept safe. Absolutely, this has no discussion whatsoever. We must return the moral high ground, and Israel must immediately cease targeting civilians. And by the way, Kirsty, allow me to say this. This is an Israeli military doctrine. They call it the Iron Dome. Whenever there is such an incident, they go after the civilians to pressure the fighters. So you've heard one of the Israeli
Well, we know there's been a lot of
just
strikes
2 minutes
today.
ago. He wanted to starve the people in Gaza. He wanted to cut electricity and water. These are war crimes, collective punishment.
So there is a possibility that both the UK and the European Commission will cut aid to Palestinians. What's your reaction to that?
That would be very, very counterproductive, and it doesn't serve anything. They will do exactly what is Israel doing. They will do exactly the collective punishment and punishing the people who has nothing to do with this. My cousin is not Hamas. In fact, her husband works for the Palestinian Authority, the opponents of Hamas. These kids, 4 years and 2 years, have nothing to do with Hamas. Everybody, including these silly ideas in the world, are punishing the people that have nothing to do with this.
And we know that children
Kirsty,
very young are also have died in Israel. So, in your view, is this a contained but appalling conflict between Hamas and Israel, or do you think Hamas want to widen the conflagration?
No, it's Israel now that wants to widen the scope. It's Israel.
But Hamas might want this whole area to be destabilized.
Well, Hamas is a militant group. We are the government. Israel has a government. There is the international community. The first and the foremost important priority now is to stop this madness, the atrocities immediately, and to learn the lessons.
So, where does this lead?
Okay, so I mean, again, I genuinely feel bad for that guy, right? I mean, he's laying out his position explicitly, right? And again, it's almost as if this anchor has no ability to do any analysis other than just saying, well, what about Israel, right? What about the victims in Israel, right? And what his point was is that, yes, of course you condemn the killing of civilians in any context, no matter who it is, whether it's Hamas killing civilians or it's Israelis killing civilians. But you also have to understand, as he was just pointing out there, right? This guy's not a member of Hamas by any stretch of the imagination. He said he was a member of the PLO. But I mean, think about the treatment of people in the West Bank, for example, right? They do not have a Hamas in the West Bank, okay? They have been, pushing for some sort of a peaceful resolution. And what have they been made for or met with? For 30 years, as he just pointed out there, they have been trying to sort something out. What are they met with? They are met with ongoing raids into the West Bank. They are met with expansions of the illegal settlements. They are met with settler violence and terrorism by Israeli settlers who are backed up by the Israeli government, by the IDF. I mean, it gets fucking nowhere. The idea that, like, Israel is this perfectly peaceful actor and just wants a peaceful resolution to this, it's utter bullshit. I mean, it's completely insane. And again, this guy just had family members that were killed as a part of these Israeli airstrikes. She doesn't even mention that. She doesn't even ask a follow-up question about that, and just turns every single question around to, do you condemn this? Do you condemn this? Do you condemn this action by Hamas? And he just has to keep repeating himself because, again, it's like none of these people want to actually have a conversation about the underlying systemic problems that are continuing this cycle of violence, right? There is one power that actually has the legitimate capability to end the cycle of violence, and that is the government of Israel. I mean, it's almost as if people think that, like, there's no power discrepancy between the people in the Gaza Strip and the government of Israel. It's not even comparable, okay? You have one that is, one of the wealthiest countries in the region that has by far probably the most advanced military equipment in the region, that's backed up by the wealthiest country, the most advanced military in the world, the United States of America. And then you have people in the Gaza Strip who are living in abject poverty, okay? You have, like, a majority of the population that is unemployed. The median age within the Gaza Strip is like 18 years old, 17 years old, okay? Half the population are children, okay? And this is what we're seeing now being flattened to the ground, being entire city blocks that are being blown up. They're cutting off their electricity, their food, okay? Because they have control over the entire reality of the day-to-day existence of people living in Gaza, right? And so nobody wants to talk about that underlying reality. They just want to talk about this sort of like tit-for-tat back and forth, as if bombing Gaza into oblivion one more time is going to be the solution to anything. It's absolutely not. And so I want to just finish finish off here with what I thought was an actual good interview that was surprisingly done on CNN. I don't know if they meant to do this. I don't know if they necessarily knew who this guy was with Fareed Zakaria here, but he posted this, and so this was actually a good example of how you air out this situation, I think, in an honest way. So here we have Mustafa Barghouti, and he is going to basically lay this out with more from the Palestinian perspective on this issue and how it actually ends up getting resolved.
Well, first of all, I am not part of the Palestinian Authority. As a matter of fact, I represent a democratic Palestinian movement called Palestinian National Initiative, which is non-Fatah and non-Hamas. And of course, I am not affiliated with Hamas. But I think this situation that has evolved is a direct result of the continuation of the longest occupation in modern history. Israeli occupation of Palestinian land since 1967. This is 56 years of occupation that has transformed into a system of apartheid, a much worse apartheid than what prevailed in South Africa. Yes, maybe Hamas did not recognize Israel, but the PLO did.
And also, just as a reminder, in terms of that, what he just said there of Israeli apartheid being significantly worse than South African apartheid, I mean, I think that that's an accurate analysis there. This is also something that has been echoed by guys like Noam Chomsky as well. I think that that's absolutely the case. And also, I want to remind people that the strategy, one of the main pressure strategies that helped to bring an end to South African apartheid was what? It was boycott, divestment, and sanction, BDS, the BDS movement, which now in the United States of America is effectively banned in a majority of U.S. states. You are literally not even allowed to engage in BDS in a majority of the United States of America. That is the main strategy that was used against apartheid South Africa. It would be a fantastic strategy to use against the apartheid government of Israel. But not only are we not even having remotely having a conversation about deploying that kind of a strategy, but we are actively giving military and financial aid and support to the Israeli government to continue their apartheid. And then on top of that, giving them diplomatic cover in the international community when many countries around the world do condemn the policies of the government of Israel. And it's like the United States, as the big baddie on the global stage, gets to step in and bully everybody else and prevent anything from actually being done about it. So he continues here.
Palestinian Authority did. What did they get? Nothing. Since 2014, the Israeli governments would not even meet with Palestinians. And what you see today is a reaction to several things. First of all, settlers' terrorist attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank that has evicted already 20 communities in an act of ethnic cleansing. 248 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli army and settlers in the West Bank, including 40 children. Attacks on the holy sites, the Muslim and Christian holy sites by Israeli extremists, as well as declaration of Netanyahu that he will liquidate the Palestinian rights and the Palestinian cause by normalization with Arab countries. And he dared even to go to the United Nations and carried in the United Nations a map of Israel, which included the whole of the West Bank, all of Gaza, all of Jerusalem, as well as the Golan Heights. He declared the annexation of the occupied territories. So, of course, Palestinians turn to resistance because they see that this is the only way for them to get their rights. The question here is not about dehumanizing Palestinians as is happening and calling them terrorists. It's about asking the question, why the United States supports Ukraine in fighting what they call occupation, while here they are supporting the occupier who continues to occupy us.
It's a good question, and I think the answer to that is pretty simple. It's that the United States of America, the U.S. government, doesn't give a single solitary shit about defending or protecting human rights from any objective or, morally centered position. I mean, we are best buds with countries like, Saudi Arabia in the region and Israel as well. I mean, these are not countries that are, spreading democracy or anything like that, or that believe in freedom. I mean, you have an apartheid state in Israel. You have a brutal, theocratic, fundamentalist government in Saudi Arabia that, kills people for speaking out against the government that is responsible for, even in some cases, the killing of American journalists and like Jamal Khashoggi, for example. And these are some of our best friends in the region. We have no principled stance on this, right? I mean, it's the narrative that we like to sell when we're doing things like invading Iraq or invading Afghanistan, right? But it's not something that is, it is clearly not something that is actually principled across the board. It's the same thing that we're saying in our support for Ukraine, but then you also have some U.S. politicians that are more honest about their goals in Ukraine and supporting and arming and funding them and stuff. And it's like our job in Ukraine from the perspective of the United States State Department or from more conservative neocons, it's not just to like protect Ukrainian democracy or sovereignty, right? That could potentially be an outcome of our support for them. But a lot of these politicians will just come out and say the quiet part out loud and say, well, the reason that we want to fund and arm Ukraine is because they are helping us destroy one of our main, geopolitical adversaries, the Russians, and their military, right? We're spending a fraction of our military budget on an annual basis to basically take out a third of, the Russian military. There are literally politicians who have come out and said that before. So, I mean, again, it's not as if the United States actually has a principled stance on any of these different things. It's literally just who is going to help us in the geopolitical region, who is going to benefit us economically, who's going to work with our U.S. multinational corporations. Those are the kinds of things that we actually care about when it comes to foreign policy. It has almost nothing to do with, actual standards on human rights or, war crimes or anything like that. So I want to skip ahead just a little bit to another, I think, important point that he made further on in this interview. So let's go ahead and continue here.
Brought down to the ground, and we already are receiving reports about families who are killed. 9 people in one family, 10 people in another family, including children. I do not want any civilian to be hurt, neither by Palestinians or by Israelis. But the question is how to end that. Will it end by attacking Gaza Strip another time? Israel has already conducted 5 wars on Gaza. One of them lasted 51 days. They destroyed everything. This did not stop Hamas, did not stop resistance. There is one way to stop any violence, and that is to end the Israeli occupation. And that is for the United States to be fair. They cannot say that Israel has the right to defend itself, but we, the Palestinians, don't have the right to defend ourselves. Let me remind you with the case of Shireen Abu Akleh, who was not only Palestinian, but also an American, a very peaceful journalist. She was shot to death by an Israeli sniper. Was anybody indicted? Was anybody taken to court? No. 52 other journalists were also killed. Our first aid providers are shot at. Our doctors are shot at. This should stop. And the only way to stop it is to tell Israel, you have to respect international law, you have to end this illegal occupation, and accept Palestinians as equal human beings.
Okay, so I mean, again, I think that he is 1,000% correct in that analysis, and I guess credit to CNN for actually having somebody like him on, because I mean, this is a perspective that, even just a couple years ago, you absolutely never would have seen on a mainstream outlet like this. Now, again, I don't know if they accidentally brought this guy on or they intentionally brought him on, but it's nice to actually have a little bit of moral clarity that's echoed throughout mainstream media audiences around the country, because I think it's something that a lot of people need to see. And just a couple other things to sort of echo the same point that he was just pointing out there of what we've seen over the last couple of days. I mean, this was an AP article. An Israeli airstrike kills 19 members of the same family in a southern Gaza refugee camp. And another part of this story that was cropped out in this image that I posted, that was further down in the article, was basically giving us a perspective in terms of how bullshit the notion is that this narrative that's pushed by the Israeli government of, oh, well, we give people warnings before we strike these locations, so the civilians should have known to get out of the way. In this example of these 19 family members being killed, the Israelis, they fire basically what's like almost like a dud or like a warning missile is what they call it, in a specific area, and that's basically supposed to give an indication of, oh, okay, we're going to fire, a missile barrage, or we're going to, fly over with carpet bombing or whatever the case may be in this location. And so they fired one of those so-called warning shots about, a couple hundred meters away from where this family was taking shelter in their basement of the house that they were in. And so they figured, okay, we'll be safe. We're far away from where that warning shot was fired. And then next thing you know, the missile comes down straight into their home and kills them. I mean, so again, it just sort of blows up that entire narrative of like, oh, well, we're going out of our way to avoid killing civilians. And then that kind of a thing happens, right? And I mean, keep in mind, there are previous bombing campaigns where a literal majority of the people who were killed by the Israelis were civilians, right? I mean, we've already, as I pointed out at the beginning of this, had 140 Palestinian children that have been killed so far in these airstrikes in Gaza, okay? Did those 140 children, attack Israel or do anything to deserve that? No, absolutely not. I mean, these are brazen war crimes that are endorsed by the United States and much of the rest of the, Western world. We also had here from the New York Times, I mean, really just hitting all of the marks here. Israeli airstrikes hit marketplace and mosques in Gaza, killing dozens. The strikes also hit 2 hospitals, schools, and infrastructure, the UN said. Okay, so we're striking homes that have entire families in them being wiped out. We have shopping centers, we have mosques, we have hospitals, we have schools, and we have civilian infrastructure that is being destroyed right now as a part of this ongoing campaign into Gaza. So, I mean, listen, to me, it's never been a complicated issue. It's not a complicated issue now. Of course, anybody, I think, with a reasonable head on their shoulders, it's very easy to condemn, Hamas going in, killing civilians, taking civilians hostages. That's not a good thing. Nobody wants to see that happen, obviously. But the fundamental question here is, how do you stop this cycle of violence? And if you genuinely believe that going in and obliterating Gaza for the umpteenth time, as they've done over the last number of decades, that's somehow going to breed peace in the region, or that it's going to solve anything, or that it's even going to take out Hamas in its entirety, you are delusional, okay? The real conversation that needs to be had here is, how do you genuinely put an end to the cycle of violence? And I think that Mustafa in that clip was 100% right, and I think that, Mehdi Hassan and others as well who are willing to come out and even potentially risk their jobs to come out and make statements like that are also 100% right. The core root of the issue here is the Israeli apartheid. It is the ongoing slow-rolling ethnic cleansing. It is the blockade and the starvation and the strangle of the Gaza Strip, okay? It is the expansion of the illegal settlements and the settler terrorism backed by the IDF into the West Bank territories, okay? You cannot possibly subject people to these kinds of conditions and expect there to never be any sort of blowback. So that's where the conversation should be. Unfortunately, it's not. Again, we have the United States of America, Joe Biden, coming out and fully endorsing this ground invasion by Israel, this bombing campaign by Israel, and it's a complete double standard here, because again, you see me or other people on the left who are saying, okay, I condemn Hamas killing civilians, right? And I condemn, equally, if not more, the killing of more Palestinian children over the last number of years by the Israeli forces, right? I mean, it's a much greater scale that Israel has been conducting those kinds of murders of innocent men, women, and children, right? As well as a whole bunch of other crimes as well that we haven't gotten into in this video. But you see somebody on the left like me who calls that out by Hamas, who calls that out by Israel, but it's never applied the same way around, okay? The same people who say, oh, you won't dare to condemn Hamas killing civilians, then when I turn around and I say, okay, do you condemn, Israel for going and killing innocent Palestinian children, 140 of them so far? They turn around and they give these bullshit justifications, and they say, oh, well, Hamas was probably located in the region, or Hamas used them as a human shield, and it's just excuse after excuse after excuse that is going to get us absolutely fucking nowhere in the long run. So again, in my view, not that complicated of an issue. End the apartheid, end the ethnic cleansing, give Palestinians full human rights. And one other thing that I'll say, because I've laid this out before, the idea of a two-state solution is, number one, not logistically feasible, given the expansion of settlements, especially into the West Bank, and the fragmenting of the Palestinian population, okay? It's not even logistically possible at this point, number one. Number two, it's not something that is even remotely, something that the Israeli government is in favor of. Again, Benjamin Netanyahu specifically, endorsing, giving further financing to Hamas and bolstering Hamas in an effort to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. So, number one, again, not logistically possible. Number two, not something that the Israeli government is interested in. And the only actual long-term solution, although it may seem impossible or difficult to potentially get there into the future, the only real option that is on the table is a one-state solution with full democratic and civil rights for Israelis, for Palestinians, for Arabs, for Jews, for Christians, for atheists, for everybody. A secular government, not an ethno-state. That is the only reality that is ever in the long run going to produce a sustainable situation. And you're not going to hear many people who like to hear that. You're not going to hear many people who endorse that idea, but I think at the end of the day, that is the only thing that could even potentially bring a lasting peace to this region.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying